Hey sis, and welcome to the Beauty System Podcast, where we discuss the science behind beauty. We are your hosts, Elaine
and Nicole, and together we will dissect important topics for women of color with the goal of making science, technology, engineering, and math concepts more accessible and relatable to everyday life.
Let's get into this episode. Hey sis, welcome to the Beauty System Podcast, where we discuss the science behind beauty. I'm your host, Elaine.
And I'm Nicole.
And we will be dissecting beauty concepts in regards to women of color with science, technology, engineering, and math concepts in mind. We just want to make STEM more relatable to your everyday life and more accessible to you as it regards to beauty. If you're following us on YouTube or on whatever podcast platform that you use, please like and subscribe and share and all the things so you can stay connected with us before we start our episode. So today on the Beauty System, we will be covering everything wash day. It's going to be everything regarding this cultural phenomenon we call wash day. So we can dissect everything that's going on and break down the different concepts and feelings and everything associated with wash day. In order to help guide that discussion today, we have Dr. Cheryl Thompson with us.
Yes, Dr. Cheryl Thompson is an associate professor in performance at Toronto Metropolitan University. Dr. Thompson holds a PhD in communication studies from McGill University. She was named to the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. Dr. Thompson is the director and creative lead of the Laboratory for Black Creativity that aims to be an incubator for research, conversations, and events for Black creatives, scholars, artists, musicians, actors, directors, dancers, choreographers, everything really. At the Creative School, she is also an author, has several publications, two books that I want to share: Uncle, Race and Nostalgia and the Politics of Loyalty, and Beauty in a Box, Detangling the Roots of Canada's Black Beauty Culture. So as you can see, she's highly esteemed. So let's welcome Dr. Thompson.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I love, every time I hear that introduction, I'm just like, yes. Yes.
Awesome. So to get started, we like to do something called human verification. It's just a quick, fun question to, relate to our listeners. So our human verification question of the day is, what is your favorite way to style your hair for everyday life?
I mean, I wear locks, right? So
yes,
the amazing feeling of locks, like when you wake up and, I take my head covering off in the morning, it's just the shag, I can only call it a shag. I just throw my head down and I just shag it out. Honestly, it not only is the best feeling, but then after you come out, it just looks voluminous, yes. And then you get on with your day and it's one lock is over here, another lock is over there. It kind of doesn't stay that way, but initially in the morning, it just, when you do that shag, it's just an amazing, amazing time.
Yeah, well, I definitely love the wake up and shake approach. That would be my favorite approach if I had one. So we want to get started on first talking about one of our goals on the podcast is not just to talk about STEM concepts, but to really open the eyes and the ears of our viewers on the possibilities that they can, in STEM and in these science kind of realm of things. So we wanted to start by understanding, what does it mean to be a communication and culture researcher and to study that?
Yes. So it's a tough field to study, believe it or not, because you're interested in the structures of media. So the media infrastructure, you should call it, right? So we have television, film, news, broadcast, in the TV world, drama, sitcom, and all that stuff, right? So that's the infrastructure. And then you have a broadcasting policy that kind of governs all of those elements of it. So it's you have the governance element, then you have the content creation element, and then you have us. We're like the receivers of all that, right? The audience, who are the viewers and the consumers. And so when you're a communication studies scholar, you're interested in either all three of those, two of those things, how they relate to each other, or maybe you're just interested in one thing. Like maybe you just want to study the representation of something in a particular media product. Myself, I'm interested in all that, but I dip into the cultural aspect, especially cultural history, because I want to understand how all that has changed over time. And I want to understand how, if we go back, for example, to the 19th century, we didn't have television, we didn't have film, we didn't have Netflix, right? But we had the newspaper. So the newspaper was the dominant media form of the 19th century and before. So for me, I'm trying to understand, how did that media form? And that media existed at a time when there was no governance, there was no policy. Right. How did it impact people's lives? And how did it impact people's lives, community? And then when we think about commerce, how did it impact economies? Right. So that's kind of that's the way I approach the field. And just explaining it to you, you could already begin to think of how complex that kind of study would be. Right. Because the biggest question when you're a communications scholar is, where do you enter the conversation?
That's good.
That's a great question, because I wouldn't know how to answer that myself, to get started.
Exactly.
There. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's amazing what you do. Obviously, it takes a lot of strategy and just a lot of different complex ways of thinking in order to kind of make it make sense for everyone. One of the things that we wanted to talk about regarding wash day and regarding hair and hair culture is when this sort of shift to natural hair happened, this shift where there was a focus on, we're not going to do, the chemicals that harm our hair and skin. We're not going to do perms. We're not going to do texturizers. And I know as we grew up, we, a lot of our friends, if not us, had those perms and texturizers in our hair. And then there was awareness that came about around the 2010 era. And there was a shift, and everybody that I at least was in my circle kind of went along with that shift. So what do you think caused that shift to happen at that particular time?
Yeah, you're totally right in terms of locating it in the 2010s. And I, even though the company had been around before then, Carol's daughter had a huge role to play, because there were so many celebrities that started to talk about the fact that that's the products that they were using. And there were all these ad campaigns. And then Carol's daughter got bought by L'Oreal. And then we know how that story's now going, right? So it's kind of unfortunate. But what I think it was a little bit of that. And it was also a little bit of the scientific research. And I'm really glad that y'all STEM people, because it's perfect. Because I think so many Black women don't realize that people have been studying chemical relaxers since it wasn't at the beginning. Really, they didn't really start studying it until maybe the 2000s. So it was really late, because the first chemical relaxers first came on the market in 1954, I think it was. George E. Johnson. That was the first. So it was like 50 years before they started to say, hey, should we be studying this chemical that people are applying every 6 to 8 weeks on their scalp, right? So by the early 2000s, they were doing the studies, and then it started to come out. So like around 2007, around 2008 and 9, there were studies that were finally coming out saying, I think there's not a direct causation, but there is definitely a correlation between the chemical relaxer and uterine fibroids and, alopecia and some other things that Black women were experiencing. And so that medical scientific research really landed 2006, 7, 8, 9. And I think even beyond Carol's daughter, that's what the shift was, because then the media reported on a lot of those studies. And, when the media, again, here's the communication scholar in me, when the media reports on a study, they don't get into the details. They just tell you the
Yeah.
top line. Researchers find that there's a correlation, and it drives a lot of fear in people, right? People get really nervous, and they're not going to go out, even though they tell you where the study was published, they're not going to go out and read that publication,
Right.
because it's an academic journal, and you probably have to be an academic to have access to that material in full anyway. So I think it created a lot of fear. And then we had Chris Rock's movie Good Hair, came out in 2009. And I think that also had an impact, because all that entire movie was really about the chemical relaxer and hair weaves.
Right.
And, that was kind of the first big budget kind of Hollywood movie that had wide distribution, that Black women were sharing some of the negative things that they've experienced using those products, right? Like we maybe have seen documentaries before about the industry, but we never heard all the creamy crack and all the stuff. Like we just didn't hear the negative part of it. And I think it just scared people. And people started to say, I think I also want to experience a different way of styling my hair. And I think that's why it happened at that particular time.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that, like, I remember the first time like watching that documentary as well, and that movie, and it really striking me as well. I think too, one of the tensions that we Maya and I talk about a lot is the fact that there may be education out there about a certain topic, but there's a certain some people, they just want their hair the way that they like it. They just want I'm gonna go against the grain. I'm not really, I don't care. This is how I want it. So do you feel like for a lot of people, was that shift that happened, like when they finally decided to make that step, was that more of those external things that they were seeing in the media? Or do you think that they had to have like some sort of internal resolve, or like listening to their hair, like coming to, I don't want to say coming to Jesus, but like essentially like that sort of.
Yeah, no, to be honest, I think it was celebrity culture. I also study celebrity culture of my many topics. Like celebrity culture is one of them. And I can't remember what year, but it was that infamous scene in How to Get Away with Murder, right? Where Viola Davis took that weave off, right? And we saw her natural hair, right? And it made international headlines, okay? Because nobody had ever seen a Black woman take their weave off or wig off on national TV, and not in a negative way. She was going through her end of day process to get ready for bed, right? And it was like normalized. And then after that, I think it was on the same time she showed up at the Oscars, again, natural hair. So it actually was a lot of these really influential Black celebrities who did it first. And I think that's why when you have that celebrity status, I used to teach a celebrity culture course, and I always used to tell them about symbolic capital. Symbolic capital is very real, right? You don't have to necessarily even be, I'm sure Viola Davis is doing well financially, but she ain't a billionaire. You know what I mean? Like, she doesn't necessarily have economic capital where she can shift economic systems. Right. But symbolic capital, very high. So anytime Viola Davis, and in the 2010s, she was doing a lot of stuff. I really think she was one of the persons who just, you were like, wow, she could be so successful and have the confidence to walk a red carpet with her natural hair. I think that freed a lot of people.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Certainly helped me out. I think we went through our big chop at the same time, and we both had those like look in the mirror, like what's going on? Crying. But then when you see something like that, it does give you that sense of peace. That's like, oh, okay, it's okay. This is a look. This is not, it's not going against the grain of beauty. It's just a different type of beauty. And that sense, when we're talking about how people perceive beauty and how they, mainstream effects on how people perceive beauty, as well as like internal effects on how people perceive beauty. I want to talk a little bit about the psychological effects of going natural. Like, what does that do for confidence? What does that do? Like, how do you think it showed up as far as people thinking about natural beauty?
I mean, I can just share my own personal journey in this,
Yeah.
right? Because I've been natural now for 16 years. So before then, I straightened my hair too with the chemical relaxer, and sometimes I would do like the two strand twists and stuff like that. But I never wore a weave. I was never a weave person. I was like, oh no, I need to scratch my scalp.
I'm with you.
It's just it's like my own personal preference. Like I need to see my scalp and I need to scratch it. I can't have it covered. Okay. It's like, no. But I think for me, when I did go natural and when you're wearing your hair in locks, it's really tiny, right? It's like it really is a big chop. It's like, oh my goodness. I was just so much more aware of the fact that I was against the beauty standard, to be honest. Like I really had that, oh my goodness, like I am not it. Like the thing that's being projected everywhere, and even with Black models, Black celebrity, it doesn't matter. I'm against it now. Right. And I'm outside of it. So I had this profound sense of, oh my goodness, like I'm outside of the grain. Like when I walk in the room, if something happens, say I did something, somebody might identify me because I'm wearing locks, right? Like they might say, oh, it's that woman with locks who did X, Y, and Z. And you're like, oh my God, that's how I'm seen. Like that's probably what they're going to use to mark my body, not even my racial identity. Mm-hmm. And so that was really a tough adjustment. And then don't get me started with the dating and especially Black men, what their preferences are and what they think is beautiful. And then having to explain, why do you wear your hair like that? And oh, it looks so nice if it was long and straight and silky. Silky is like a dirty word for me now. Like when someone says, oh, I wish your hair was silky. I'm like, don't you understand? Black women, if you wear your hair natural, it doesn't matter how nice you care it will never be silky. Like silky is not a word for the natural texture of our hair. It could be soft, yes. It could be really well textured, but silkiness and natural hair, they don't go together. And I think that was a tough psychological thing because again, every message that you get is that your hair is supposed to be long, silky, and shiny. Again, also natural hair. If your hair too shiny, you'd be like, you got too much grease in your hair.
Okay, that's the problem.
Stop using so much of that. Right, it's a problem, right? It's like got to take it down a notch. So it's like so. I think that's the biggest thing. And then the third thing is you realize that you're also out of the economy of beauty. I can't just go to any store and use any product, right? A lot of 95% of the products, I'm just already out the game, right? And so I think all of those things culminate with, to your point, a psychological shift that happens in your mind. And I think there's a lot of Black women who go natural. And I think at a certain point, they almost get depressed and they go back to straightening because of all the stuff. But what I would encourage people, if they're listening to this, is that if you push through that moment of the blues or the just feeling down, honestly, it's like almost like you'll get over that. I think of that scene in Castaway. You ever seen the Tom Hanks movie, Castaway? Yes. Right? Where he's on the island and he's trying to get over that big wave and he thinks he's not going to make it. And then, right. And then the volleyball, whatever you called that thing, it's like, oh, he's trying to save it, but then he wants to get over the wave and he has to make a decision. Do I save my friend, which is a volleyball, right? Or do I go over the wave? And right? It's a life decision. And he's like, man, I'm going to take the wave. I want to be free. I want to be out of this. I'm taking the wave. And so he lets it go. And it's the best way to describe what you have to do when you go natural, because you're going to hit that big wave, right? And you actually have to just ride it out, because when you get on the other side, you're just going to feel so free in yourself. And so almost like you have this magic. I don't want to use that kind of term, but it's true. Yeah. Almost like you figured something out about yourself that other Black women who are still trapped in the relaxer and the weave and the stuff, they haven't yet figured out, right? And but that's a journey. It really is a journey, and it can be tough.
Yeah, I definitely had that wave moment right after that. Those scissors touched my hair, and that hair fell to the ground. I did my big chop. I was having a wave of tears. right in the mirror. So I definitely understand that part. And it's a really important thing to acknowledge. Like, you will go through seasons, just like in your life, you will go through seasons, and like having the beginning of your hair journey is just a season, and you can get through that natural part. So one of the things that
yes, you can.
You can get through it. One of the things that we've like read that you've discussed a lot is like the role that Black salons play in creating economic opportunity, and how they were that way for people like post-slavery to really have that economic opportunity. Can you, and also creating that cultural epicenter as well, because that's where the people gathered. Can you explain a little bit more of the importance for that for people who may not be as understanding of where salons fit in this story of Black beauty?
Yeah. So, I mean, the story of the Black hair salon, especially in the United States, has a lot to do with the Great Migration, right? That people, I hope, should be familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that post, right? I hope. But post 1865, Reconstruction era, and it's actually not even the Reconstruction era. It's actually post 1877, when essentially Reconstruction ends abruptly, and the South goes into a worse situation that happened in slavery, where now you have sort of an institutionalized segregation, but also you have the threat of Black life is very real post 1877. So you have the great like exit from the South to the North. Right. And when people arrive in the North, obviously the Northern United States, just like Canada, was just as racist, by the way. Right. Just as racist. It's just that it wasn't necessarily in terms of public facilities. So you could still go on, right? Take the trolley, it would have been at the time when the subway's built. You can go anywhere, you can do anything, and basically pretty much go anywhere. But the economic opportunities for wealth accumulation, pretty much non-existent. So what you have is a bunch of people, especially the migration that went to the Midwest, especially like Chicago area, Illinois, area. You have people who realize, well, what did we bring with us from the South? Well, on the quote unquote Southern plantation, we had to learn how to do our hair. In fact, there were many cases where Black women and or men were tasked with doing the hair of their plantation owners. So the slave master would have the enslaved person do their hair. So hair care became one of the sort of skills that the enslaved person acquired in slavery. So when the Great Migration happened and we have the cities of the North, it was just the natural business to then roll out to service your community. And you can think about how important then the hair salon, just like the barbershop, became, because you're not just servicing your community. They're now coming in and sharing the problems, right? They're now coming in and saying, you know what, I'm trying to open up this little restaurant over here. Can I put down some flyers and you help promote my business? So, you know, and I caution to say this because people will hear this and think, oh, Black people were better in segregation because they had the tight-knit economic circuits, right? They're like, see, you were doing better because your community was thriving, because money, what I mean to say is because money was circulating within the community, right, and it was rolling over it, right? Because you could not go into the white districts and spend your money. Money right. was recirculating around in the Black community. So the Black barber benefited, the soul food restaurant, the garage, even the hospital, everything that was in these Black communities, everybody was servicing. So there was Black wealth. But what I always say to people is that it's almost like, you know, you being in a snow globe and thinking this is an amazing town versus being in reality, right?
Yeah.
And that's what those businesses were. They were thriving, but they were in a snow globe because they didn't have access to the same infrastructure that actually would have led to wealth attainment. And for me, wealth attainment is when you have generational wealth that you can pass down. Right. And if your business, economic business, so the Black hair salon was in the Black community, but think about the Black community if you're trying to scale a business, now I'm talking some economic terms, right?
Mhm.
But if you're trying to scale a business, you can't scale a business if your customer base is essentially static.
Exactly.
So that's what the hair salon business was. It was a static business. Yes, you kept customers and you had good customers, but it was really difficult to scale it. And that's why Madam C.J. Walker is truly one of the most phenomenal women in the history of women in the Western world. Because even in the circumstances of Jim Crow, right? She figured out how to basically almost piggyback on what would have been a system of business that was started by a large white-owned company. And they started this business of going door to door. So the door-to-door person would come and they would pitch the products and sell you. Madam C.J. Walker was the first Black person to say, why don't we do the same thing? We shouldn't just have the hair salon where they come. We should go on the road and go to the people. So she broke through that wall of the geographic segregation, sort of geographically sectioned off economies. She completely blew that up and said, no, we can create a network. So that's why Black Beauty Products, Madam C.J. Walker's company, why she became the first millionaire. She broke through that, the sort of the limitation of a customer base that had to be geographically located in the same space. She said, no, let's hire women, Black women, and take the network. And she would literally go town to town, city to city, and just break through that wall. So she actually is she kind of created the first Amazon before it was Amazon, right?
I like that take.
I do like that take.
It is real. She really
Yeah.
did. And I think what is so disappointing though in history is that she never gets taken up in that way. She never gets taken up as an entrepreneur, as a business person. Instead, they're like, oh, that's the person, black hair. And she created hair care product. They always make it seem like it was like nothing. Understand, this was a woman who did not have access to education, created a business plan that could not only support a brick and mortar store and many different beauty salons, but also a multi-district, geographically placed business where she was distributing products. At one point, the products were coming to Canada, Jamaica, Panama. She even was selling overseas in Europe. And this woman did not go to university or college. Okay. Like, she should be remembered in the annals of business history. She shouldn't just be remembered as a beauty, right? And that tells you the racist framework that we use to establish greatness when it comes to business. It's just a very white supremacist framework that the only people that can be seen, it's a white supremacist and patriarchal framework, because some Black men have managed to enter the annals of business because they did, like for example, Johnson Products, George E. Johnson. Yes, but Madam C.J. Walker should be right there because she started it all.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I think one thing you said, one thing you focused on is the salon experience and the experience that was created economically and socially. What I want to ask now, with where we are, how everything is online, you can learn anything you want to do on YouTube. You can do that with your hair, your skin. You can kind of, step outside of that salon experience and take a DIY approach. Where does that cultural epicenter that the salon was, where does that live now? Is it online? How do we still fulfill that in modern times?
Yeah, I feel like I had this conversation recently with someone. It's really a different world that we're in, because let me just start with the positives, right? The positives to what you just said is that you can literally find out anything now. Like, you want to do your hair in a certain twist, or like you want to find out about a certain product that you just bought. You want to see how people are using it. You could just go on and find a how-to. And all the questions like of the pre-internet era that you would have just sat by yourself and asked, and maybe somebody could help you, but maybe not. Now you can go on this amazing thing and find the answers. But what's missing is community. What's missing is conversations that aren't necessarily about products, but are about feelings, right? Like I'm old enough to have still grown up in that era that when you went to the beauty salon, like you just talked about your feelings, like while they did your hair, right? You talked about your problems. You talked about what's ailing you. You know, I remember even when I used to go to the natural hair salon here in Toronto, where I'm at, we would talk about so many things like music culture. They would have this particular place. They'd have some really good reggae playing in the background. There's incense burning. It's like, and then somebody would come in and tell a joke, like a random person would just like come on in, and because they knew the people, and then they just start rapping with each other. You're not going to get that through YouTube video. Like it's the YouTube era of hair care is very transactional. Like you need something, you go on there, you find it out, and then you leave. And I think that's what's missing today. Like that idea of seeing hair as community and seeing it as a way for us to really relate to each other, because no two Black women have the same hair texture. We just don't. You could be in the same family, right? Like I can't talk to my mother. My mother doesn't have locks. She doesn't know anything about it. Like we can't even have a conversation about our hair,
right?
Like ever. I mean, so that means it can be a little bit isolating if you don't know other Black women and you're able to have those conversations. And I've thought about this a lot, like over the last 10 years, how things have changed so dramatically. Like and I thought, funny enough, I've asked myself, where do young Black women go to have these conversations? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think I was asking a similar question the other day when I was talking, because, you know, men still often go to the barbershop. There are also things like cigar bars and, you know, places where, you know, people with economic minds often gather to have those discussions. So it is kind of a wonder of like, where do women get that experience? And hair did do it for quite some time. But now that there's not as many people joining there, I feel like there is that lack of space and forum to have those kind of conversations. So we end up creating more mass events and things that are specifically targeted to that, where people feel like they have to be a certain way rather than come as their self, share with a trusted source, and grow together concept.
Yeah, but you know, the truth is though, is that, and I've experienced this, it's really hard to put a natural hair person and a weave person in the same space and have a conversation about hair. Right? That's going to get real awkward, like real soon.
I like my weave.
Right? Like, so it's just going to get awkward. It's going to be like, ooh, like there's just going to be things we probably don't want to talk about. I think first we have to recognize because even in my book, I said this, I don't judge anyone for their hair choices, but I think based on your hair choice, we should still be able to have a conversation. So when any weave people get real defensive, I'm like, no. Why are you getting so defensive? Like, you're obviously making this choice for a reason. Just talk about it. There's no shade, right? There's no shame, no shade. But for whatever reason, they just get, why are you asking me about my weave? And it's like, no. Just calm down. Like, because I think what I'm saying to you is that means that we can't relate to each other, right? And it becomes like a barrier between us. And I think that's part of the issue. You know, if you were to go back, I would say before the weave, like, so before like the really the 90s, I think it really took off in the 90s. You would go to an event and every Black woman in that room would have a different hairstyle. Like there wasn't one look, right? There's so many. And now I find it's kind of a weird thing. It's like we have segregated ourselves. So certain events I walk in, it's pure locks in there. It's like, right? Or it's like pure locks or like pure naturals in there. And then you go to another event and it's like all weave. And it's like, what is going on here? Like, why are we not gathering together? Right? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like, to your point of how earlier when we were talking about the celebrity aspect of it and how like there were certain celebrities moving forward with like, I'm all natural, you know, you're gonna see me in my natural beauty. How do you feel like that has shifted the way that we've kind of separated, I guess, in certain terms, in terms of like, I'm all about the wigs, I'm all about the weaves, or I'm all about natural hair? Like, do you feel like we've had these cultural icons that like pioneering these lanes for us to make us want to follow them?
Well, I mean, the truth is that wave that you talked about in the 2010s, by the
Yeah.
end of the 2010s, most of those people went back to the weave.
LOL.
Like, right? Like
Yeah.
the movement is over, okay? Like,
Oh, wow.
pretty much. Like, they really did. And so that also sent a message. And why did they go back? Again, I always take a bird's eye view, because they're working in an industry that generally speaking does not celebrate Black hair, Black women, nothing. Right? Like I the other day I watched something with Nia Long. Nia Long was on some talk show. I can't remember which one. I thought, God, Nia Long is beautiful. Like, oh, like compared to some of those white actresses in Hollywood, no, honestly, like Nia Long still looks like she's 25.
No, she does.
Okay?
She does.
Like, amazing, like
Yeah.
everything. And I kept thinking to myself, Nia Long, my vibe, just her vibe, she doesn't want to wear a weave. I could just tell she probably really doesn't, but she does it. But she does it because she's in an industry and she wants to work. So there's so many pressures that are put on Black women because you think about a casting call, right? Just step back, and that's why I have a lot of empathy for why they probably went back to the straight hair aesthetic, because you go on a casting call, and since really, it was in the 2010s where they started what they call sort of the race, the blind casting. So they're just calling people in, right, for the role, and they're not really telling you if the role is for a Black person or a white person or an Asian. It's just like, come in and read. So you go on that read. There's like 50 women there. Everybody's hair is straight, and then you show up with your nice twists, right, and looking all cute, but you're the only one that looks like that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So who are you going to be assessed against, right? So this, again, even though communications, understand, I study structures, right? And I'm really interested in how infrastructure, especially the structures that are invisible, how they actually impact the choices that we make as individuals. And while we think we're choosing, like individually choosing, the reality is you're choosing from an option of one.
Ooh.
Right? That's your option. One.
Yeah. Exactly what they want you to see.
Right? Wear this weave or get on the unemployment line. That's your options. And so a lot of times, so with that in mind, that's why I step back now from a lot of those celebrities who have gone back to the wigs and the weaves, and they'll be on the TV even acting like, oh, I love my weave. Believe me, that's all fake, man. They're just saying that. They're literally lying to the public. I tell you right now, because if you're a Black woman, especially in your 40s and 50s, and you've been wearing a weave for 30 years, you have some thinning that's going on.
Yeah.
Traction,
oh, we know it's true. You have some effects from those choices. So you're going on there talking about how you love this. No, you don't. It's just that you can't admit to the big lie in Hollywood that it's okay to be yourself.
Mm.
For Black women, no. We have to look like Becky and Cindy and everyone else because they want to work at a basic level.
Yeah. And I think just moving into like talking about more of like the industries and the structures behind it, like when we talk about the beauty industry in general, a lot of companies have like tapped into this like cultural phenomena of wash day, and like you need X, Y, and Z to like to achieve what you need or to achieve the perfect style. How have companies really what strategies have you seen that companies try to use in order to attract the Black customer and the Black woman regarding wash day specifically?
Well, yeah, I mean, this goes back decades, right? The beauty industry really realized it was like in the, a lot of people don't realize this about the 1960s. So the 1960s, like the Black is Beautiful and everyone was
Yeah.
wearing their afro.
Yep.
Oh, you don't understand. The industry hated the afro so much. Oh, they couldn't wait for that to go. Why? Because you don't need a lot of products.
You don't.
It's not a product dependent style, right? Once you find your salve or balm, whatever you want to call it, that's it. You're just going to use that. Like even me with, they hate locks even more because I don't, I have one product that I use and it's all natural. And I literally buy it maybe every 8 months. I need to replace it.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like a horrible, they would hate that. So they had to create this idea of the Black consumer who needs a lot of products to be whole, like to get the right look is right. So they figured that out in the 60s, in the 70s, when the afro started to fade. And then came the chemical relaxers really became the most popular around 1977, 78. Like it was 79. It was like at the end of the 70s. And then in the early 80s, you had the Jerry curl. The Jerry curl is actually what did it, believe it or not. The Jerry curl changed the industry. Not for the reasons you think. It wasn't because it looked, right? It's not because it looked so good. It was like companies were making so much money because you need to wash it. When you apply it, you need that activator shampoo, the shampoo after, right, to take all the chemicals out. Then you're going to need the moisturizer. You need the conditioner. then you need the daily spritz. Yeah, you got to spray it every day. So right there, I'm talking about 6 products just to wear that hairstyle. And then if you're doing that every week, you got to go maybe twice a week, once a week to replenish. They figured it out that we are we are easily marketed to because we believe the lies of these companies. To be honest, it's because we lack a critical discourse around consumerism. I actually believe this in the Western world, because it's not just the US, it's in Canada, it's even in Britain. Consumer goods, like the capitalist system has, and people always say, what happened in the civil rights movement? Why are we here? All the things that seem like you go back to the 60s, you thought, man, we'd be like in a different world. No, but capitalism realized all you got to do is sell them products. And they'll forget that they're not free. Just sell them the hairdo.
Man.
Right? And I tell you, if you go back in history, that is exactly what happens. And many of the Black celebrities in the 80s, they were complicit in it. They might not have known that they were complicit because they probably couldn't see the perspective of the executive, like what the executives in those companies were doing. I think about the Jacksons and Michael Jackson and his Jerry curl. The Jacksons actually made that hairstyle popular because they were so popular at the time in the early 80s. And they got a Jerry curl. I swear to you, everybody got one. And I remember I was like a little kid. I said to my mother, please don't make me. I beg, don't make me. Like, because everybody we knew, it was like a virus was going around the community. Like, it was, no, I'm telling you, we don't remember it now. If you're not old enough, it's like everybody was getting this Jerry curl. I said to my mother, please don't put that in my head. I don't want that in my head, because don't do it. Because everybody I knew with a Jerry curl, the hair was smelling funny. They got to spray it all the time. It was like, it was just like so gross. And I remember as a kid thinking, why don't people see it? Like, why don't they know that they're actually being manipulated into a hairstyle that is not good for you? And I say that because it means that there's a lack of consciousness that has been in Black communities for at least 60 years since the civil rights movement. I feel like Black communities have been asleep, and we've allowed corporations to completely change our sense of self.
Yeah. Speaking of the beauty industry, there have been a lot of Black owned brands that have come out and tried to go for what's right, what's natural, clean ingredients, things that help, textured hair. And then we see this thing that happens where they are either bought out by a conglomerate, as you mentioned earlier, and there's like this shift that happens, and their practices and their products are changing a little bit, small bits at a time. How does this cycle reflect the story of Black ownership in the beauty market?
It's tough. I tell you, it is so tough, because I used to be a loyal Carol's Daughter customer. And then when the company got bought, right? I'm using this product. I'm like, this is not the same product. They keep saying this is natural. The product did not feel natural anymore. I'm like, it was so it's so oily. And I remember like Carol's Daughter products never used to be like that. Like they were always like, oh, this is water-based and da 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 da. And I remember, okay, so then when I bought after the sale, I purchased a product and I'm like, why am I seeing like a film of oil? And they're claiming that this is water-based. They're lying to the people. Okay. So we know that as soon as those companies buy the natural, they change it. They put in some synthetic that maybe they can get away with it because of labeling. Understand, beauty products are labeled so shady. Like the labeling of beauty products is not like food products.
Yeah.
Half the time I look at a beauty product label, I'm like, this is probably just lies. Okay. It's just like, we don't know what's in this. It's just like they just make it up, and they can, because I think those products are geared towards women for the most part. And as consumers, the economies in the West have never valued women as consumers. So often we just don't get the full picture of what we're consuming. But to your point, how do you compete? It is a very tough question to ask, because we also gotten to a point in like consumer culture history where we tend to be very loyal to brands. We're loyal to brands, not necessarily companies, right? So a lot of these conglomerates, they hide that they are actually owning that Black brand. They just put Brandy up in the cover, and you're like, oh, Brandy, Brandy's part of this now.
Oh,
meanwhile, it's like, no, she's just the spokesperson for the brand. And the brand is actually owned by some conglomerate like P&G that you wouldn't even know, right? So we're just so, and that's what makes it hard, because how do you compete in an industry that is really sort of what they would call vertically integrated, meaning that there's really only a few companies that exist. Like, you think there's a lot of products out there, but they're all kind of owned by maybe
7 or 8.
There's 5 beauty companies. Yeah, maybe something like that, 7 or 8. They own everything. So so how can you compete in that space? And what I say to people is, you got to go back to the basics. And the basics are this: stop thinking you need to create a company that you need to scale, that needs to be sold. Instead, start creating companies that are about servicing communities. Period.
Wow.
Change the business model, right? The business model of the dominant culture does not have to be the business model of a Black business. Because like during, again, Jim Crow, their business model is, we're going to be here to help our community. We want to see people grow. We want to nurture. Their mentality wasn't like, oh, let me build this and scale it, and then, oh, I hope we get bought and then I can go and, no, they never had that mentality. Now you have Black businesses. Why do they sell? Because they're like, oh, well, the company can't grow. Oh my goodness. Stop thinking like a conglomerate. Okay. Like, redefine growth. Like, stop thinking about growth only in economic terms. And I think when you do that, I'm sure where you live, I know where I live here, there are Black beauty shops, been here 40 years. They're not trying to grow. They're not trying to open up another shop. They're like really happy that they have their shop and they have loyal customers, and the shop keeps growing because word of mouth. They are completely content with that. And I think to be honest, we need to get back to more of that. Being content with a customer base that, yes, it can grow, but doesn't need to reach the level that you would catch the eye of a L'Oreal or a P&G and they'd want to buy you out because you're too much of a threat to their bottom line, basically.
Yeah, and that's a really good perspective to have. Maya and I have this conversation a lot, actually. Like, when you think about it, like, most of the businesses, at least here in America, are small businesses. Like, every business does not have to be a huge business. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. But
no, it doesn't.
One of the things that you touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but one of the things in advertisement that we're seeing is like a focus on presence. So like, we want a diverse presence. We want someone in there that, that we want a Black face in there, but we don't see that wide variation of representation in terms of like skin tone or hair type or hairstyle. Like, how do we acknowledge the progress that these companies are making, but also challenge the lack of true representation?
It's very, again, these are age old questions that you're asking because, I would say it really happened in the 90s. The 1990s was a really pivotal time in terms of diversity marketing in general. And maybe it's I think it was like the 1990, they said everyone is multicultural. Okay. Like, I can't remember who said that, but it was some magazine that said that. And it was like, okay, I don't know what that means. But it was this movement. Yeah, I don't know what that means. This movement toward just focusing on color. It was like, if you remember the company Colors of Bennington was like even the Gap in the 90s was like this too, where they just wanted like the brown skinned person. I have to call them that because they just seemed like it was about the skin tone. It wasn't about their culture. So it's not like they were bringing Blackness, right? It was just like their tone was clearly not white, but then it was also clearly not too quote unquote too dark, right?
Right.
Paradoxically, on the runway in fashion, I also write about fashion, by the way.
Wow.
I do that too. But in fashion, yeah. Lots of pots on the stove. Because the truth is, fashion has had a big role to play in beauty culture. So paradoxically, in the 1990s, while you had like sort of the light-skinned model on magazine cover and even TV ads, the runway was like the dark skin queens, right? Naomi Campbell, Alex Weck. There was like nothing but dark skinned women on the runway. And they were like loved in the fashion industry, right? And it was kind of like a confusing time because TV and print were pushing a very different agenda than fashion. And I feel like here we are like 30 years later, and it's almost the same thing again. Like, I've noticed in a lot of fashion runway, they just don't want dark skin. They want the darkest pigmented person they could find to be on the runway. Like, literally, like they want extreme contrast, because in fashion, it's all about contrast. That's why they do it. They actually don't care about culture. They're like, we want contrast. That's why even now you see the models, white models on the runway, they're like ghostly white. Like no color, no tan, nothing. They want that extreme differentiation, right? Whereas in print, TV, even like social media ads, that contrast often doesn't play very well. So that's where you'll see sort of the quote the light-skinned person, or the person who looks kind of, they call it now cosmopolitan, right? It's like, you don't know what they are. They could be is
that what they're calling it?
Yeah, like the cosmopolitan person, they could be Latina, they could be Asian, they could be Indian. You don't know what they are. Like, you cannot tell any ethnicity. They're just kind of like this cocoa, this caramel complexion, and the hair texture. You don't know, is that a weave? Is that their hair? Like, it's just this weird, and they almost look computer engineered models. Like, they almost don't look human. Like, somebody has just gone on Photoshop and just picked out like attributes of women that they think are beautiful and put them together. Whereas the runway, in fashion still remains in this binaristic that we need, that the quote unquote Amazon Black woman and the like really British Victorian white model. And it's the reason why Asian models, Hispanic models, they have a hard time in fashion. You don't see a lot of them on the runway. And that's the reason, because they only want extremes. They want the extreme difference. And I think, to your initial question, it's like, why can't we just get over it and just like get over all that and just see beauty for what it is? Like it's just so, but you want to know why we can't get over it? It's because these industries are still predominantly owned and run and operated by white men.
That's it. Look, that's what we don't want to talk about. That's the reality.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thompson. This has like been a wealth of information. I'm gonna go home and burn all of my wigs. No, I'm just kidding. I love my wigs. But
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Do you?
Yes.
This is no. I'm telling you the truth. This is the era. If you grew up in my time, you would know. This is the era to do you. But if I ask you about one of your wigs, don't be like, "Oh, why you ask me about my wig?"
Yeah,
it's like,
for sure.
Let's have a conversation, right? Like, let's take it down, because at the end of the day, I just truly believe this. Black women, if we're asking out of love. We're not asking out of critique.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. Well, her name is Victoria, by the way.
Okay, Victoria, that's fine.
Yes. Well, we really appreciate it. Can you please share with our listeners where they can connect with you and find your information if they're interested in learning more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so drcherylthompson.com is the website. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Cheryl T. I'm also on Instagram at the Black Creative Lab.
Wow.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cheryl Thompson, guys. And thank you all for listening. Again, do not forget to, whatever platform you're on, like, share, subscribe to our platform, and turn on your notifications so you are aware when we are talking again about the science behind beauty. In order to find the Beauty System, you can find us on Instagram at The Beauty System. That's The Beauty Sis, like hey sis, and STEM, like science, technology, engineering, and math. Follow us at The Beauty System, and we will see you next time.
Bye, sis.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Beauty System podcast. If you haven't had the chance yet, please like, rate, subscribe, do all of the YouTube and podcast things so that more people can learn about the science behind their beauty.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at The Beauty System. That's The Beauty Sis, as in hey sis, and STEM, as in science, technology, engineering, and math. Bye, sis.
Bye, sis.